All right, good morning, everybody. Today is October 21st. And before we get started, I just want to make a few reminders. First of all, I'll have your grades for Exam 1 in the computer by the end of the day today. If they're not already there, they will be by the end of the day today. That's certainly the plan. So you can check that out. And also, just another reminder that we are coming at the tail end of Module 4. So Quiz 4 opens tomorrow, y'all know that, and so be sure you take that before Sunday at 8 o'clock. And also the discussions 7 and 8, those are due by Friday at 8, so participate in those by then. And as always, if anybody has any questions, concerns, anything at all, get in touch with me and I'll be happy to sort that out. So let's go ahead and get going. Remember, we won't be covering everything in Module 4 in the lecture, so be sure you check all that out, okay? There's the Western Hemisphere in Module 4. I've posted material on that we won't be talking about. But today, what I want to talk about is China. Now, one aspect of this that we have to understand is that Chinese history is so long, it is so vast, it is so extensive that we couldn't possibly discuss it in one lecture. You cannot discuss the breadth of Chinese history in one course. China has been around a long time and an awful lot has happened. And so all I'm really doing is giving a very brief overview of the culture itself. So please keep that in mind. One part of examining the development of a culture, as I always emphasize, is looking at the physical geography, because societies adapt to the physical surroundings. And you definitely see this when studying the development of China. There are a handful of characteristics that play a key role. First of all, China has two very large rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. And these are, of course, the English pronunciations of them. I'm going to get everything wrong when I pronounce the words in this lecture. So remember, we're not speaking Chinese. These are big rivers. Other rivers, of course, flow into them. They drain very big river valleys, and they are ideally suited for cultivation, which means they're ideally suited for human development. And China will have a very large population. The Chinese people develop agriculture on their own. They grow their society completely in-house, if you will. China is the oldest continuous civilization on the planet. China has been around so long that historians divide China into a series of dynasties, eras of Chinese history. And Chinese historians don't focus on all of China. If you're going to be a specialist in China, you kind of have to pick the era that you're going to look at, because it's not realistic for anybody to be a true expert on all aspects of Chinese history. It's just been around too long. It's been around too long. And so that's what we have to understand to begin with. Now, another aspect of Chinese culture that should be understood is that China has traditionally been ruled by an emperor. And over the centuries, this emperor was elevated to godlike status. And there have been many, many of them over the centuries, because again, China's been around so long, and all of these different dynasties had their own imperial systems. China got rid of its emperor about 110 years ago, and there doesn't appear to be any realistic chance of bringing it back, at least not in any time in the near future. And so there is no more Chinese emperor, but for most of its history there was. What is the one Asian culture that still has an emperor? Other Asian cultures, of course, had their own kings and emperors like other cultures did. There's only one left. What's the Asian culture that still, as a matter of fact, there's only one person in the world that still has the title of emperor. There's only one. And who's that? What country is that? Anybody know? Japan. Japan still has an emperor. He's just a figurehead. He doesn't do anything important, but he does still sit on a throne. They call it the chrysanthemum throne. But we're not talking about Japan today. We're talking about China. So, let's take a look at this and let's see how China developed. The first significant dynasty that we need to look at is the Shang dynasty. And the Shang dynasty emerges about the 16th century BC. So we're looking at around 3,500 years ago. China had already been around for a while before Shang, but we're starting with them. The Shang dynasty lasts about 500 years. And I want us to be our own detectives here. Let's take a look at some artifacts from the Shang dynasty. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an anthropologist or anything like that to understand certain aspects of the Shang dynasty just by looking at some of these items. So what would be the first conclusion you could draw if we were to put these items on a table in front of you? We have a knife down there. We have like a drinking vessel, like a cup, and then there's a big vase. What's the first conclusion you could draw? What's one thing you're going to know about these people right away? They're good craftsmen. Absolutely. I want you to look at that knife, and I want you to look at that sort of ornate case that it goes into. Somebody really knew what he was doing when he crafted this. So what do we see with that? Well, it took somebody a lot of time, didn't it? This took a lot of time to make, but it also took an awful lot of time to develop the skills to make it. So we have a society that celebrates investment in skilled craft. We have a society that celebrates investment in art, right? Because clearly this was designed with an artistic purpose. This was not just a functional knife. This is clearly a ceremonial type knife. Chances are this was never really used. So, knowing that, what else can we derive about the society that created it? What else do we know? Well, they've got plenty of good raw materials, right? There's multiple materials that go into all of these. One material that is unique to the Chinese, that they have been making stuff out of for centuries, and this is a big part of their identity, a big part of their ethnic pride, is jade. Jade is a uniquely Chinese material. And the Chinese, if they want to make something special, if they want to make something beautiful, if they want to make something that is important, they make it out of jade, just to let you know. But anyway, what else can we see? What would we know about a society that would create something like this? We know they have craftsmen. We know they have skill. We know they have people that will invest enormous amount of time into developing the ability to create something like this. So what else do we know? Okay, well, we know that they work together, right? But how about this? We know they're good farmers. We know they're very good farmers. And you say, well, how do I, again, we'll look at the knife. Looking at this knife can tell us that these people are really good at producing food because this guy was not a farmer. This guy was a craftsman, which meant there is more than enough food to go around so people can invest time into other skills. You see what I'm saying? This guy didn't have to worry about where his next meal was coming from, so clearly there's plenty of food. So interesting how you can draw those conclusions, right? How about this? This is a society that has wealth. Because whoever bought this had money, right? This is not a cheap item. We don't know how much it costs, and we wouldn't possibly be able to do a conversion anyway, but whatever was paid for this was substantial. So there's wealth in this society. How about this? A society that can have skilled craftsmen, a society that can have people that put the time and energy into developing such a capability is also almost certainly going to be stable and orderly, right? This guy is not worried about somebody breaking into his workshop and stealing all of his stuff, right? This guy is not going to have to sit there every day and wonder if he's going to have to fight off the bad guys that are going to come in and burn the village. This guy is comfortable and he is secure and he feels safe. And so he doesn't have to stress about that. How about this? Common sense is going to tell us that Everybody in China doesn't have artifacts like this, right? This is a fancy item. This is an item that somebody with money is going to purchase. So we can derive that this society has a nobility, right? There is a wealthy upper class that exists in a society like this. And this is a wealthy upper class that will spend money on luxury items, not just items that they need to survive. So we automatically know this is a hierarchical society, as societies tend to be. There's going to be an upper class, there's going to be a peasant class, there's going to be a skilled class, etc., etc. So you learn a lot from a society just by looking at a little bit of their stuff, don't you? Right? What else do you see if you didn't know any better? What's on the blade? There's writing on the blade. These people are literate, aren't they? And the craftsman that made this knife is literate. So what does that tell you about him? Right? We have literate people that don't have to be literate. You don't have to be literate to make something like this. So what it means is that there's pretty good education going around, right? There's people reading and writing that are doing it because they want to, not just because they have to. And that opens the door to seeing how advanced this culture is. So we can learn a lot. And frequently, of course, that's what we have to do, right? Because we don't necessarily have the written history. We don't necessarily have what we want to know. So we have to figure out other ways to learn it. Well, the Shang Dynasty is going to give way to, here's some writing from the Shang Dynasty, excuse me. This is on the bottom of a tortoise shell, and yes, the image should be flipped. I should go in and flip the image. Chinese script is read up and down. It's not read back and forth. And the Chinese letters are quasi-hieroglyphic. They don't have A, B, C, D, E, or their own versions of A, B, C, D, E. Words can sometimes have a symbol. Different symbols can go together to mean a word. The Chinese script is considerably more complex than what we use in the Western world. I've been told there's something like 500 and something letters in the Chinese alphabet. You don't have to know them all to be literate, but it just depends on how complex you want to get. And in order to work with things like computers in the modern era, typewriters and such, they've had to simplify it, and there are more simplified versions of it. But it is a very complex written language. And Japanese, just in case you're wondering, is a derivative of Chinese. The Japanese clearly learned how to read and write from the Chinese because their script is not the same, but there's similarities between the two. The Shang Dynasty is going to give way to the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty emerges in about the 11th century BC. It will last for around 800 years. Much of what is understood to be Chinese emerges during the Zhou Dynasty. The real Chinese identity that would be recognized today. You could take somebody from the Zhou Dynasty and introduce him to somebody in modern China. I don't know if the language would translate very well, but they would have a lot in common. Chinese culture clearly develops a modern identity with the Zhou Dynasty, even though we're talking about a few thousand years ago. One important characteristic that we see during the Zhou Dynasty is the Chinese start using silk. The Chinese start using silk. And again, just the use of silk indicates that this is a very advanced culture. Silk is a luxury item. It is a luxury cloth. Even ordinary Chinese do not wear silk. So just the fact that they're going through all of the steps necessary to produce it speaks volumes about what kind of world we're looking at. Why aren't we all walking around in silk? Silk feels wonderful. What's the problem with silk? You can't wash it. Silk can't get wet. You get silk wet and it ruins. So that's the trick about silk. Here are a couple of Chinese emperors from the Zhou Dynasty, doing a good job of being Chinese emperors, I guess. The golden yellow that we see, and we can see it in this garment, just this beautifully ornate garment. That golden yellow is reserved exclusively for the emperor. Nobody else gets to wear that color but him. So anytime you see a Chinese dude wearing that, you're looking at an emperor. And of course, almost always the pictures are wearing that. That is a symbol of him. Also, the five-fingered dragon, a dragon with 5 fingers is the sign of the emperor. Nobody else gets to show that either. Just a little FYI there. But again, just like those other artifacts, if you look at this, immediately this is a highly advanced civilization. These are not primitive people, not by a long shot. Anyway, the Chinese during the Zhou dynasty are going to develop other technologies such as crop rotation, which dramatically increases agricultural yield. They will have very advanced engineering accomplishments during this era. A lot of agricultural tools, for example, are developed that help them farm even more. And what this means, of course, is that with plenty of food, they see a population increase, lots of diversification of labor. People can go into other occupations. And it is from this that the Chinese will develop philosophy. The Greeks developed philosophy in the West. The Chinese developed philosophy in the East. Both cultures developed it independently. And to understand the Chinese, we should look at Chinese philosophy. We really should. And I don't need to tell you who the most famous Chinese philosopher is, the one philosopher everybody's heard of, and that is our friend Confucius. And Confucius is a good example of how somebody can live during the Zhou dynasty. So let's start with a core outlook of how the Chinese people view the universe or view existence. And this isn't Confucius, this is more of just a general idea. When they started looking around, they realized that much of what we see throughout the human experience tends to have a dual nature. The universe is kind of like a seesaw sitting on a central pivot. There is light and there is dark, right? When we're humans, we're happy and we're sad. We're active and we're resting. There is good and there is evil. It seems like everything is a coin with 2 sides on it whenever you look around. And so the Chinese developed this concept of balance. The universe and all that is a part of it, including us, seems to exist in a state of balance. And they would call this the yin and the yang. It doesn't mean light and dark. It doesn't mean good and evil. It doesn't mean happy or sad. It means all of it. There's just kind of always a one and the other. And so the way you should live your life is recognizing that this is a force you cannot change. There is a yin and there is a yang in everything about you. So finding that balance is the healthiest way to live. You're going to be active and then you're going to be tired, right? You're going to be awake and then you're going to be asleep. So what's the best way to balance that? Well, get things done when you're awake and then get a good night's rest. Because if you don't get enough sleep, you throw yourself off balance, right? But if you don't work hard enough, you throw life off balance. You're going to be happy, but you're also going to be sad, right? Recognize that. Learn to do things right when you're happy. Learn to do things right when you're sad. Recognize that there's going to be both. Etc., etc. If we were to bring ancient Chinese people into 2020, into, today, and they were to communicate with us, they would probably say we've got our goals off. Because you see, if we go out and we talk to a lot of people and we say, what would be sort of your goal in life? What do you want to do with your life? Most people would say, well, I want to live a happy life. I want to live a good life. I want to enjoy myself and be able to, make the most of it while I'm here. And that sounds lovely, right? But the ancient Chinese would say, you're going to be sad just as much as you're going to be happy, right? The ancient Chinese would say, don't try to live a happy life. Try to live a balanced life. And there is a difference if you think about it, right? Understand that you're never going to be in a situation where you're always happy and never sad, where you're always doing well and not anxious. Just like there's not going to be a time where you can always be awake and not sleep. Because if you try to do that, you throw yourself off balance. It is impossible. There is no human that has ever lived that has lived a happy life. Now, there's plenty of humans that have lived balanced lives. That's a possibility. So seek that instead. Balance. Balance. So, with that in mind, along comes Confucius. He was born in 551 BC. He was, like a lot of philosophers, not a real hard-working guy. He worked as a government bureaucrat. He had some sort of government job. But by all accounts, he really didn't put a whole lot of effort into it. And we see it with all of them, Socrates started being a philosopher after he quit working, right? Nietzsche never did anything with his life. Philosophers tend to be that way. But clearly he put a lot of thought into the world. For the most part, he spent all of his time grooming those eyebrows. I mean, that's the best I can come up with. His writings are written in a series of volumes known as the Analects. The Analects of Confucius, where he talks about how to balance your life and the rules that you should govern yourself by. Well, what does Confucius have to say? What does he say that we can learn? He argues that within every single one of us, within every single person, is an inner voice, an inner consciousness, the part of you that makes you, you. And he called this your Tao. Now, it can also be spelled with a T. And we are all individuals. Every single one of us is unique. There is nobody else like you. You could be an identical twin, and your twin is different than you when it comes to your Tao. And it is as much a part of you as your bones and skin and teeth and hair. Now, in the West, we might call it a soul, right? What did the Egyptians call it? Ka, right? Kind of the same thing. That consciousness that you have, your spirit. And see, the thing about your Tao, according to Confucius, is that you cannot change it. Your Tao is what it is. It is you. And so, making decisions and taking actions needs to be in line with your Tao. You need to follow your Tao. That's how you live a balanced life. If you fight your Tao, if you try to be somebody that you're not, your life's going to get thrown off balance. You're going to, split your differential, tip over, and that's it for you. Bad life. Follow your Tao, be who you're supposed to be, and there you go. Keep in mind, though, this sounds very pleasant. Oh, well, of course, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to follow my Tao. The reason why this is so in depth is because it's hard to follow your Tao. It is not easy to follow your Tao. It's easy to deceive yourself. It is easy to lie to yourself. It is easy to pretend you're following your Tao when in fact you are doing everything you can to not follow your Tao. What he is not saying is Your Tao tells you to work hard and make good grades and become a success. My Tao tells me to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and, that SpongeBob marathon ain't going to watch itself. We're just following our Taos. The lazy hippie who's sitting on the couch and refusing to work, he's not following his Tao because deep down he knows he needs to be working, doesn't he? When you have a test the next day, you know you're supposed to be studying for it, don't you? But you're not following your Tao when you decide to chill out instead. So following your Tao means doing what's difficult just as much as it means doing what's easy. Remember, you have to balance. And when it's time to study, get off your butt and study, right? When it's time to rest, after the exam, go home and rest. And then a few hours later, get up and study for the next test. You get where I'm coming from. And so, following your Tao doesn't mean doing what you enjoy. Following your Tao means recognizing, I gotta work when it's supposed to be work time. But the good news is, you follow your Tao, you will end up with a balanced life. Some fun examples. Talk to college students. We say, well, what do you want to be? What are you gonna do? Well, one thing your Tao is telling you is that it's time for you to pick a job, isn't it? It's time for you to decide what you're going to do with your life. But we can go to our freshman year, we can go to our sophomore year, we can go to our junior year, we can go to our senior year. How many people graduate from college and still don't necessarily know what job they're going to do, right? Confucius would say, you got to figure that out. That's tough. It's a hard one. See a lot of students that say, I'm going to be a lawyer, or I'm going to be a doctor. Certainly a terrific career. Why do so many people say, I'm going to be pre-med or pre-law? A little louder? Hey, yeah, you bet. Those jobs pay a lot of money, right? You might not be cut out to be a lawyer. Make a lot of money as a lawyer. It's not really who you're supposed to be, though. There's a lot of lawyers out there that make plenty of money and hate their jobs because they were chasing the money rather than their Tao. And Confucius would say, you got to think a little harder about this. That being said, we have to get back down to career and what following your Tao really means. And one of the reasons, I think, that students have a hard time picking their career is because we have a hard time deciding what we enjoy. We say, okay, your career should be something you enjoy, something you get meaning out of, right? Confucius would say, no, it's not. It's called work for a reason. It's not recreation. It's a job. And so if your career choice is going to be based on what you enjoy, Confucius would say that's not following your Tao, right? Your job is going to be balanced. There's going to be hard days. There's going to be easy days. There's going to be a lot of effort into it. There's going to be a lot of stress. If you want to make money, you've got to work for it, right? And so pick a career that's balanced. Don't say, what's going to make me happy? You get where we're coming from, right? So it's hard, right? It's hard to do this. How about the person we're going to spend our life with, right? You want to get married, want to have a family. Let's line up a group of young men and say, what do you want your future wife to be? They're going to say, well, where's that Victoria's Secret catalog? Oh, that girl on page 3 looks right for me. There's a lot of men married to beautiful women that they can't get along with, right? They weren't following their Tao. They weren't looking for someone who they were compatible with. They were looking for someone based on other characteristics. Line up a bunch of young women. They say, oh, I know the right guy for me. He's the guy making $1 million a year. That's the guy I want to be with. A lot of women are married to wealthy men, right? Not happy with them. So finding the person that you're with means really reaching within you and saying, who works with me? Who is willing to put the effort into it that would make a marriage successful, would make a life successful? There's a lot more to being with someone than the superficial characteristics that we often think are important when we're young. Y'all get where I'm coming from? So it's hard to follow your Tao because a lot of times you have to go against what you've often been told. You have to go against what you often think you want. But again, if you say, I'm going to balance my life and I'm going to make good choices regarding the people that are in it, I'm going to make good choices regarding my career, and I'm going to get up early in the morning and I'm going to work hard all day, and then when it's time to take the day, it's time to get off work, I'm going to be done for the day and I'm going to put other activities as a priority. I'm going to live a balanced life like that, Confucius would say it'll work itself out. And there's still no guarantees, right? That's just the best way. What do you think of Confucius? Smart guy? Yeah? Maybe a little bit? None of that's necessarily wrong, right? None of it's necessarily a bad idea. Well, unless you are a legalist, because there was a different group of philosophers that would come along that disagreed with Confucius. The legalists. The legalists were not comfortable with what Confucius had to say. Because if you think about it, Confucius is telling you to be free, right? You should be free to follow your path. And Confucius trusts that by teaching people to do this, people will be mature enough to make these positive choices. And that society will be better and people will be better under those circumstances. And the legalists say that's not going to happen. If you tell people, follow your Tao, be who you're supposed to be, make your own choices, people are going to be lazy. People are going to make bad decisions. People are going to not do what they're supposed to do. An awful lot of people will say, I'm following my Tao by never going to work and just letting everybody else carry the load. That some people will make positive choices, but an awful lot of people won't. The legalists argue that a proper society is one where individualism is not celebrated, where we are pushed to recognize our similarities, and we all work toward a common good. A legalist society is one where rules are rigid and enforced, where freedoms are limited. You have a job to do. Get out and do it. We're like ants on the anthill, each with a task, building society collectively. And the people that try to be individuals are the troublemakers. The legalists would say, I want you to look around. Everything that you see was built by somebody who was not enjoying their job. If we were to bring back a legalist and put him in this room right now, he would say every single one of the cinder blocks in that wall weighs 55.5 pounds. And I promise you, the guy that was putting that wall together was not following his Tao. He was following orders. You get where I'm coming from? And the people that were not willing to work were the troublemakers. The legalists would say we need to follow rules. And for the most part, the legalists saw society as more or less children. More or less children. And the leaders in society need to guide those children along. And again, that's probably the best example of legalist philosophy. Let's look at kids, right? Do you get your kids up in the morning, when they're in grade school and say, you just do what you want to do today and reach within yourself and decide if you want to go to school or not, right? Heck no. We know what will happen then, and we understand that because children don't have developed minds, right? Children can't understand the bigger picture for the most part, and why school is important, and why homework is important, and why hard work is important, and why chores are important. We tell them you're going to do your work, and you're going to do your chores, and you're going to make good grades, and I'm not giving you a choice, and yes, you will be punished if you choose not to. Y'all see where I'm coming from? Well, the legalists would say that for the most part, we stay that way as adults. Even as adults, that's kind of how it is. And so what you're going to do is you're going to get up every day, you're going to go to work, you're not necessarily going to get to choose your job, you're not going to necessarily get to choose your life, but society will benefit. I don't know who's right. Confucius, let's all kind of be free, or the legalists, no, we need to march in line and do our job. Who's right or wrong? Are there Western parallels? Are there versions of this that we would see in the Western world? What about Athens and Sparta, right? The Athenians, we should make our own decisions and be free and experiment. And the Athenians would say, yes, follow your Tao, right? The Spartans would say, no, do your job. March in line, follow the rules. Does a society need a little bit of both? Absolutely, right? In the West, Augustine was more of a legalist. right? Most people are going to destroy themselves if given their own decisions. And so, so there are parallels here. And there's, again, that sort of balance, right, between the ability to be free to live how you choose, but then also having to have the discipline to make sure that everybody does their job. Understanding your Tao doesn't mean my Tao tells me to sit on the couch all day. I was watching the news this morning, and I thought about a great example of how the legalists would say society's gone wrong, how we've got a real problem here. And it may sound absolutely ridiculous, but just think about it for a second, right? Did I just do something wrong? Am I being a bad boy right now? What'd I do? I took my mask off, right? Here's the thing, folks. This is a pandemic, okay? People are really dying, right? I've had 3 friends die from coronavirus. We've lost employees at MGCCC from coronavirus. And wearing a mask is not particularly burdensome. Honest to goodness, it's not. Okay, it's a minor inconvenience, and we're talking about a disease that is killing people. And so the legalists would show up and say, if you are so childish and so petty that you are unwilling to wear a mask in a pandemic, then we're going to have to force you to, aren't we? Because common sense says now's the time to wear the masks. And they would look at the people that are saying, well, I should have the freedom. Then they would say, no, you shouldn't. They would say, no, sometimes we just got to have rules, don't we? And anybody that would say, I'm not going to wear a mask in a pandemic is somebody who needs to be whipped into shape. It's that simple. And so the legalists would say the whole problem with getting everybody to wear a mask is the reason why so much freedom in the society ultimately leads to that social decay. Y'all get where I'm coming from? If we lived in ancient Sparta, would we be wearing our masks? You better believe we would, right? Because the ancient Spartans wouldn't put up with that nonsense. You're putting on your dang mask. You see what I mean? And so the legalists say, follow the rules. The Confucius people say, be yourself, follow your Tao. Right? Moving forward. Eventually, the Zhou dynasty comes to an end. The Zhou dynasty comes to an end. There's a couple of 100 years where China is sort of in a civil war. Powerful nobility, warlords carve out different regions, and there's a lot of fighting among themselves. And in 221, a Western warlord named Qin ended up centralizing China. And this is, by the way, where the word China comes from. It's a derivative of his name. And many people consider him the first, quote-unquote, modern emperor. And again, even though we're talking about over 2,000 years ago, this is China here. And Qin would unify China under an absolute rule, and he was a very rigid legalist. He was just a brutal dictator. Under him, the economy improved and recovered from all of these generations of fighting. Literacy and the arts improved. China traded with its Asian neighbors. There was, of course, a tremendous amount of law and order. You know, the streets were safe because you don't want to be caught committing a crime, that's for sure. Yet he was, of course, very controversial because he was very brutal and he was very rigid and he was very intolerant. Under Qin, and by the way, that mound there is his tomb. His tomb has never been excavated. And there's all sorts of legends as to what is in his tomb, but it's never been excavated, but we're going to confirm some of those legends here in a second. Under Qin, China began the mother of all construction projects, the Great Wall. The Great Wall, which is well over 2,000 miles of wall. Ostensibly, it was designed to keep out invaders, to keep the Mongols out and those people from the northwest that tended to invade and raid the countryside. And it is one heck of a construction project, I'll tell you that. It is easily the largest stone structure in the world. There isn't one wall, though. There's multiple walls and different sections of it, but it cannot be seen from space. That's one of the myths about it. Nevertheless, it's really something else. You know, they say the pyramids are the largest stone structures in the world. No, they're not. The Great Wall of China is the largest stone structure in the world by a mile, or by 2,000 miles. The thing about the Great Wall, I'll just ask you, remember, put yourself in the mind of Emperor Qin. What other purpose of the wall might there be? Yeah, we're going to keep out the invaders. Newsflash, you cannot wall off a whole country the size of China. Can't do it. And the wall never worked that way to begin with. What other use of the wall might there be? What might also be a motivation? What's that? Well, a deterrent, it shows the power of China, right? You know, any outsider that shows up that's going to give us trouble, boy, they take a look at that wall and it tells you what kind of country we're dealing with. And there's no question. Think about the pyramids, right? They project the power of the leader, project the power of the state. Well, how about this? We're going to have troublemakers. We're going to have people that don't follow the rules. We're going to have criminals and dissidents, right? How about we send them way out on the frontier and just work them to death, right? A penal colony, just send them as far away from us as we would want them to be and have a project that never ends and they just work until they die. It's kind of like a prison. You see where I'm coming from? And that's really the purpose of the Great Wall of China. And it was so effective, they kept doing it for hundreds of years. You know, they built on this thing generation after generation simply because it was a great way to get rid of the people that we want to get out of society. And I'm sure some of these people were genuine criminals, but others were people that, you know, criticized Emperor Qin or, you know, didn't follow the rules in some other more benign way. At one point, it is estimated that 25% of the Chinese population was working on the wall under Emperor Qin. That is how brutal and demanding that he was. You know, he would send you out to the wall for anything that did not toe the line that he created. And so he was, you know, you can celebrate somebody who restores the economy and trade and all of that, but you have to also ask, how are they going to make that happen, right? You don't celebrate somebody who sends 25% of his citizens out to work the wall. There's got to be a better way to do it. There's got to be balance. So that's that. Now, in the 1970s, you know, we've got these rumors that his tomb is incredibly ornate, is incredibly remarkable. And in the 1970s, some farmers near the tomb started uncovering shards of pottery that clearly were very old, that clearly were from a long time ago. And so the archaeologists came in and the anthropologists came in, and they started doing work. And they started uncovering terracotta figures, these sort of baked clay figures in this field. And it wasn't all that far away from Qin's tomb. And it was one figure after another was being discovered. And they were pulling them out of the ground. And it didn't take them long before they figured out we got ourselves a terracotta army going on here. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 of these soldiers that have been unearthed. And they are intricately developed. Do I have any more pictures? Oh, I don't have the good one. There are horses, there are chariots, there are weapons that were actual real weapons that had never been used. And here's where it gets mind-blowing. Every single one of these terracotta soldiers is a unique artistic creation. It wasn't a cookie cutter soldier that they stamped. And every one of them was ornately painted and ornately decorated. This was a real army that was completely recreated in clay, every soldier unique, buried at the time of his death. Which, when you start wrapping your head around the amount of work that would have gone into that, just simply to be put into the ground, that gives you a good insight into the just absolute power that this man had and the wealth that this man had. And the Terracotta Army, by some accounts, would be considered one of the wonders of the world, right along with the Great Wall of China. The 7 wonders of the world is sort of this Western concept that somebody invented a while back. And it overlooks the Eastern wonders of the world, right? It overlooks things like the Great Wall of China and the Terracotta Army. And I went to a traveling exhibit and I saw one of the terracotta soldiers. And I mean, it was a beautiful statue, and thousands of them were created just to be buried alongside kin. And there's always been talk about maybe doing, an excavation of his tomb, but the Chinese government has never permitted it, and best they know, it has never actually been excavated. There's a legend that his sarcophagus is floating on a sea of mercury, that they filled an entire pool full of mercury, and then there's the night sky and the universe as he would have seen it. And everybody thought that's not happening. That probably didn't happen. But then they've done some soil testing, and sure enough, there's mercury in the soil. So you tell me. It's pretty neat to think about. Anyway, in the big scheme of things, Qin didn't last very long. He died in 202 BC, of course, and he didn't really create a dynasty. Nobody in his line really took over. And so a new dynasty emerges known as the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty lasts about another 400 years. And then there's more dynasties that will come after that. There's the Tang Dynasty. There's the Ming Dynasty. The last Chinese dynasty was known as the Qing or the Manchu Dynasty. And as I mentioned earlier, it ended about 110 years ago. The last emperor was a little boy. He was about 8 or 9 years old. And they kicked him off the throne, and they haven't had an emperor since. And there doesn't seem to be any movement in China to bring it all back. So that was the end of that. Okay. Speaking of the end of that, we are out of time. So I want to remind everybody we have our we have our quiz that opens tomorrow. Make sure you do that. Check Canvas for your grades. And like I said, get in touch with me if you have any questions.